Talladega. 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 How's it going, everyone? Let's go racing. I'm Zach Peters, and we're talking about Talladega 2022, the spring race. Okay race. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but it was an entertaining day, just not necessarily the day that I expected. Talladega, man. Talladega, baby. That's the race. I'll be real honest with you. There are some tracks that I just don't care for in NASCAR. I don't really care for Texas Motor Speedway. I didn't care for Michigan that much. Sort of boring races to me. I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but there's some where we go there. I enjoy it because I'm a fan, but I would never take anyone to that track. Talladega is the opposite of that for me. It is the track. It represents what NASCAR is as an entity almost better than any other track that they go to. And it's the fans, the racing, the atmosphere, the crowd's always great. This race, they had like 70,000 in the stands, and I have no idea about how many they had in the campground. I heard it was sold out in the infield. And the race is usually white-knuckled the entire time. It seems calm sometimes, like there's a rhythm, but at any moment it could break open. There could be a run. There could be a wreck. A tire could go out. You have pit stops that go crazy. Talladega usually is going to produce some pretty great moments, and usually there's always a crazy finish. And that's NASCAR. That's NASCAR. This is the race that you take non-NASCAR friends to get them hooked. And it was a good race this year, but not necessarily the race I expected. Time for some quick thoughts about the race, some details about why it wasn't necessarily the race I thought it was going to be. It was one of the races where there were moments that I thought I was pretty close to seeing all my favorites win or at least finish in the top 10. It's not a secret by any means, but like 3 of my top 5 drivers that I usually root for, including my favorite, they drive for Hendrick. And so if it wasn't for some random chance, some pit road stuff, they all could have finished in the top 5 or even at one point 1, 2, 3. They still have some good finishes, just could have been even better. Another thing from that race is even before the race started, we got to talk about qualifying. Qualifying doesn't matter all the time at a super speedway, and sometimes it does, and it's sort of, I don't know, it's hard to tell if it's going to matter or not. Fords didn't qualify well this race or in Daytona, but Daytona they dominated. This race they disappeared for whatever reason. Chevys were gone, disappeared from this qualifying. I mean, there were a couple of Chevys who qualified in the top 10, but a lot of them were further back in the pack, but yet Chevys dominated this race. Toyota, they were a mixed bag, but qualifying is interesting for this race, and I wonder what qualifying will be like the second race this year at Daytona, and also I'll throw Atlanta in there now, and the next Talladega. I wonder if more cars will care less about the speed of their qualifying lap and care more about sort of the aero and how they handle and the speed they gain drafting with one another. Again, massive improvements for Chevy on the super speedway. Again, Daytona, the Chevys were gone. Fords dominated, throw in some Toyotas, like Hendrick and all the other people that maybe you expect them to be up there, they're just not there. They are not in the race at Daytona, but at Talladega, something completely different. And at first, I was surprised, but then I thought back to Atlanta, and Atlanta showed us, obviously with the repave, Atlanta was a little different this year, a lot like a super speedway, and Chevys did a lot better in Atlanta than they did in Daytona. So maybe we should have known that it was going to be a little different. Another thing is just timing. Because this race was different, timing and chance played a lot more of a role than what it normally does. Timing's always a part of racing. But because passing at Talladega this year for the first race was not normal passing, they couldn't generate runs. That top lane was not working like we usually see it work. So it was the timing of pit stops, the timing of cautions that became the best place to get yourself in a position to be around the front. And the front's where you wanted to be because you couldn't pass. And so there are people who are usually super bold and aggressive, and there are people who are sort of more, not passive aggressive, but they're more stable and steady in their approach to a super speedway. You have drivers that are going all out from the very start, and you have those that don't really start trying to push until the end of the race. And the problem this year was that there was a lack of second lane in the racing. Very few cars can make it work up there. And really, to me, in my memory, only 2311 and maybe Ryan Blaney could make that top line work. And so if they weren't up there doing it, you were just dead if you pulled out of that bottom row. And even then, you could pull up to someone's bumper, but you would lose all momentum if you pulled out of that draft just like that. So it was different this year, and it created a different race than what we are normally accustomed to seeing. And so if you were a patient driver, you had to rely on some timing to make it up to the front and rely on some other people making mistakes. You weren't going to generate a run unless you were up front. And so that's why, to me, this race was a 6 or 7 out of 10 and not the usually 10 out of 10 that I'm accustomed to enjoying at Dega. And again, it was still a good race. It just wasn't up to the standards that I expect. And I hope that they examine the aero packaging and some of the other stuff, maybe take some, I don't know. They got to do something. They've got to do something to fix sort of the cars dying in dirty air or dying outside the draft so drastically. Of course, any race, especially Talladega, it's the final lap that matters, and it was a crazy final lap. We had Larson with a bold but poorly timed move to take the lead that really shook up the finishing order, knocked out 2311, who had dominant cars all day long, and it was Ross Chastain with the win, with not having the best car. But when you find yourself up front, like we talked about with Kyle Busch last week at Bristol, when you find yourself up front at some races, you find some wins that normally you don't get if you don't have the best car. But he was in the right place, the right time, because of timing, because he didn't have a terrible car, and because he was just up front. Good race. Not the best, but a very good race for me. I hope they can fix some of the aero stuff next year so that the outside lane has more viability and there's, I don't know. It was just weird. It was weird to me. And I just hope they work on that. But it was a good race. I can't wait for later this year to catch the second race. Maybe I'll even try to go. I don't know. But thank you for racing with us today. I'm Zach Peters. See you again next time.